Good afternoon. I'm very sorry I can't be with you today. Unfortunately, I have duties in Westminster, but I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak this afternoon. I understand being the first speaker after what was probably a very good lunch, you're probably looking for a bit of a rest. But I've got a few things to say about social value and the Social Value Act. Within a few weeks of becoming a Member of Parliament, I was asked to sign the Private Members Bill book. It all seemed a bit of a mystery at the time, and I completely forgot about signing it. A couple of weeks later, I got a call in the office from the BBC saying, if you're going to do a Private Members Bill, what are you going to do it on? And it's okay to do that in front of selection committees, but when you have a real opportunity to make a change, it takes a bit of thought to get something that will actually make a real difference. Before I was a Member of Parliament, I was a local councillor and understood some of the things about procurement and some of the challenges that local and small organisations would face. As also as a candidate, I had the opportunity to go and paint community centres and make a difference there. So I was able to see things from a number of different facets. How the small local community organisation can make a difference and the challenges those organisations face when they are putting forward a tender for something that the local authority needs or perceives a need to achieve. Knowing that I was the first Conservative, there was two other people in front of me, one Liberal and one Labour, I knew that I was going to have time in front of the House to talk about this issue in serious depth. So we had lots and lots of conversations with lots of different organisations, and here is the opportunity to praise Social Enterprise UK for what they've done in making sure their part in making this bill become an act. There's obviously complications along the way. You need to be there on a Friday. That is a major complication, unbelievably, because most of you being constituents yourself would prefer me or your particular Member of Parliament to be visiting schools and hospitals and doing surgeries on a Friday. It's okay as the person who's presenting the bill, but encouraging other members to support is a bit of a challenge. But where the challenge was made a lot easier was having cross-party support. And I know that you'll be hearing from Hazel Blears at the end of the session, but Hazel was absolutely fantastic in making sure that the opposition were as supportive of this bill as I was. And there's obviously reluctance. Any piece of legislation there is a reluctance to put more legislation on the statute book. But this seemed to be the right time for what we were trying to do. A very, as Hazel may say later, a very small but perfectly formed bill that went through step after step after step, reading after reading, went into the House of Lords, and from that day we had a piece of law. It's good to be here or speaking to you around this time of the year, because it's a year since this piece of legislation was rolled out to the public sector at large. It's a small bill. It's not talking about strategies, it's not talking about definitions. It's really a work of persuasion. It's a work of trying to change a culture. That culture being looking towards the future and not looking perhaps at now, looking towards the medium and the long term. We have many different examples that we've used along the way. For example, the case of a youth centre. Somebody in an office will look at the cost of a youth centre and think we could save money by closing that youth centre. But what we're not considering, or haven't considered so much in the past, is what that youth centre can deliver over time, whether it's teaching people about substance misuse, it's building relationships with the local police, it's talking about teenage pregnancies. And if you take each one of those in turn, closing that youth centre, saving that £100,000 will cost society, in every way you want to describe a cost, a lot more in the long term. There's many examples like that. When we talk about guys and girls in a job centre all know how to A decorator, there's an electrician, there's a carpenter, somebody who can drive a van. Now, always in the past, they've been up against the megacore, the real big corporate sector, who have the resources and the energy and the experience to put in really good bids to win these contracts. But what happens when Mrs. Smith on a Sunday night, who's very elderly, finds her heating doesn't work? We're going to send in that megacore who's already in the contract. There's a penalty of going out on a Sunday night and costing so many thousands of pounds to do that particular deal. Or is she going to ring those guys that she knows that live down the road that can go and fix it because it is the right thing to do? But not only will they help Mrs. Smith out, they'll also perhaps go into schools and teach young people about trades and skills. They won't be claiming benefits because they've found a new job and a new role and all the associated benefits that go with that. That is, I'm sure, to this audience, the better way of looking at things. But going back to the bill, it's about persuasion, it's about a culture change. It's asking for a duty to consider talking to these organisations, perhaps even when designing a contract, so that there is a better understanding of what is available in the community and what the community can offer. This is obviously a very new piece of legislation. Our commissioners in local and national government have worked to a script for a very long time, for decades and decades and decades. And that script is about saving money. It's about cutting costs. It's not about thinking of different ways of doing things. This is about looking at things in a totally different direction. And one of the challenges we've faced over the year is the level of education, the level of, in terms of skills, in terms of knowledge, in terms of experience. How do we do these things? If we've always operated in one way, how are we going to operate in a different way? Now, working and visiting councils such as Liverpool, Birmingham, I know other councils around the country are really hungry to adopt these different ways. And I think we've got a lot of success through that. I think the Furniture Resource Network, for example, in Liverpool, has shown that there is a very different way of getting people who have been long-term unemployed back into work, and are very successful in doing so. I've already had the opportunity to thank Social Enterprise UK for the work they put into making this bill become an act, but I'd also like to take an opportunity today to thank Landmark, because when I'm explaining the power and the range of this act, Landmark is a very good example. When people say to me, what are the limits of this act, which departments can we work with, people rarely think that the Ministry of Defence is an opportunity where social enterprises and social value can really be put back into our communities. So I give them credit for stretching into an area where even I thought was fairly limited where we would go. I suppose how I'd like to finish speaking today would be to talk a little bit about where I think we should be heading. At the moment, this is a little-known act. I'm very grateful for all of you who have shown interest today. But we need it to become even more of a movement, perhaps, than it is already. What do we need for that to happen? We need to publish our successes, promote what works. We need to explain some of the technicalities, like, for example, the social return on investment, to show and prove and demonstrate what social enterprises and different community groups, voluntary sector, charitable groups, small businesses for that matter, can actually use tools that are available to demonstrate that this can actually do good, save money, make a difference, because there are examples around the country which are putting these metrics together. We need our commissioners, who I know have a tremendously difficult job already, to understand what we're trying to achieve. And I think one of the things that the government has put in place is the Commissioning Academy, where cohorts of commissioners will come down to London and be trained and explained all these pieces of legislation. We need to make sure that our local councillors, our local political representatives, are aware of the Act and what difference it can make for their communities. We need those small community groups who are doing a day's work, and then of an evening on a Friday night they've come up with a great idea for their particular neighbourhood, to perhaps have the courage to be a bit braver about what they're doing, to talk outside that group, to talk to their local authority and say, here's a thing, can you help? Can we deliver this on a wider scale? We need our local residents to think about how things can be done differently. What would look better in their neighbourhood if it was given a chance, if it was supported, whether we're talking about a community centre or a youth centre, or we're talking about a care home. All these things have different opportunities and different potentials when we become to talk about social value. I suppose at the end of the day, I think personally I'm very proud of what has been achieved, not necessarily by the Act, but how there is such an appetite across our country for our neighbourliness, working together, coming up with innovative solutions to some long-term and existing problems. And I'm grateful for all your work in trying to achieve that. I think there's a lot more to come. We need to look at thresholds, we need to look at legislation, how this will look in a year's time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time. I know that in terms of the social enterprise sector, it is one of the growing sectors in our economy, and one thing all politicians talk about is about rebalancing the economy, and I think this Act has a major role to play in that. Thank you very much for listening to me this afternoon. I know you've got a number of great speakers on after me, but finally, thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference.